Jack Reusen and the Faithflame. Chapter 1. Hurt and Loss. Jack hadn't stormed off in a huff for ages. Little kids did that. His parents should have tracked him down. It couldn't be that difficult to find him. He sat with a squelch on a slimy tree stump, his jeans soaking up dampness, especially the butt. Jack pulled his old coat close. It failed miserably against the drizzling rain. The worn fabric of his hood stuck to his head like a cold, wet helmet. The whistling wind, biting his cheeks, left his eyes watering, though that might not have had much to do with the wind. At lunch, clouds had covered the sky in an eerie grey blanket. Since then, the sky had deepened to the colour of slate. Night was coming, and his parents still hadn't appeared. What warmth was left was already seeping away. Tired, cold, and a little frightened, Jack was surprised that the strongest sensation he had at that exact moment was hunger. Why did he feel hungry? He'd had a picnic with his mum and dad just before the clouds rolled in, just before he'd lost them. Jack sniffed the air and instantly found what had sparked his hunger. Out here, in the middle of the woods, there was the unmistakable smell of cooking. There wasn't a house for a mile or two, so who was cooking? Jack let the mystery take his mind off things for a few seconds. It could be somebody camping, but the thick, smoky trail rising above the trees didn't look at all like a campfire. Jack got up and trudged through the wet bushes to investigate. He slowed his pace for a moment, reluctant to wander from the last place he'd seen his parents. But he needed something to distract him from feeling so lost. He hoped he'd be close enough to hear them when they came back. For a few minutes, all he encountered was mud and wet leaves. Then, through the skeletal branches, he spotted the most peculiar house. Jack had been visiting these woods for as long as he could remember, and he had never seen this place before. He tried to make sense of the sturdy little building made from chunky rocks and ancient lumps of wood. It had funny little windows too, made of bumpy yellowish glass, and a thick straw-covered roof which flopped over the whole building like an old duvet. Though the cottage seemed to have sprung up overnight, it looked like it could have existed since the beginning of time. Distracted by little glowing windows and tufts of smoke swirling from a lopsided chimney, Jack almost didn't notice the door open. Jack moved quickly. Before the door had opened more than a crack, he had leapt into a thick growth of bracken. A man stepped out of the house. His silvery hair hung long and loose on his shoulders, and where raindrops touched it, orange light sparkled from the room behind. He peered into the night, his brow furrowing in confusion. Despite his grey hair, the man's skin was bright and clean like a boy's. His strangeness frightened and fascinated Jack. He couldn't run without being seen. Besides, he had nowhere to run to. Jack waited in the bracken, hoping to find out more about this strange man. The bracken, sodden with dewy rain, sucked at the last bit of warmth Jack had. A tiny ball of heat deep in his stomach struggled against the chill. Jack felt jealous of this man, dry and warm in his long, thick coat. The man walked round the side of his house, picking up wood from a stack of logs. Through the open door, Jack spotted a black stove, its belly glowing orange through a little window. On top of the stove, a pot bubbled thickly, the rich, savoury smell of whatever was cooking more intense as it escaped out of the door. Jack could almost taste it. He even started to think about asking for some, but he knew to be wary of strangers, especially when he was on his own. He felt even more worried when he realised that no one could know that this house existed. As Jack tried to figure out what to do, the bracken beside him crunched, and a deep, booming voice rumbled above his head. "What do we have here? Oh my, could it really be a matter, boy?" Jack couldn't speak. A ball of panic had wedged itself in his throat. He looked up at the man, who looked stranger still up close, and started to cry. This wasn't just trying to get my own way crying. It was real, scared, lost and alone crying. Jack had never met a man like this before, and he couldn't imagine what he might do to him. Wait, it's okay. Please calm yourself. I didn't mean to scare you. It's just, well, I wasn't exactly expecting company. my name's Finn Morai, and from the look of you, I'd say you've never found yourself in the land of Fey before." Finn invited Jack into the house. Despite the temptation of the warmth and the food, Jack would only agree to sit on a bench outside and talk with Finn. That was a strange thing to say. Jack had met a lot of adults in his life, but they all called it talking to each other, not with. He asked what Finn meant. Finn explained that you talk to something that can't talk back, like a tree root when you catch your toe on it. Talking with was something you only did with other speaking creatures. Jack was sure he'd misheard. "Wait, what do you mean speaking creatures? Like parrots?" Finn laughed. "No, not parrots. Oh, I'm sorry. I've jumped ahead of myself a bit. Let me start at the beginning." Finn went quiet for a second. A few seconds, actually. He stared into the dark forest around them. Jack started to think that this young but somehow old man might have fallen asleep with his eyes open, when suddenly the man shook his head like he was trying to get some water out of his ears. "Oh, Jack, I don't know how to tell you this. Actually, there are a lot of things to tell you about, but this is probably going to be the hardest to hear. Something you have done drew you close to the land of Fey. It made the barrier between our worlds thin, and you fell through. This hardly ever happens anymore. We spent years strengthening the barrier to stop this sort of thing." Jack had no idea what Finn was talking about. Perhaps people weren't supposed to see Finn's house? Was Finn angry that Jack had found it? No, Finn looked more sad than angry. Jack tried to explain that he was just trying to find his mum and dad, and asked if Finn would help him find his way back to the path, or maybe lend him a torch. Finn shook his head. "I don't think you've understood what happened. You're not lost. You're in a different world. It looks a lot like yours, I'll give you that, but ours is not the same. Your path isn't there, Jack. Your town isn't there. The only way back is to undo whatever tore you through. Now, what's the last thing you remember before you arrived here?" To be honest, what Finn was saying should have sounded crazy, but Finn somehow made it all sound so real. Jack couldn't help believing it too, and that scared him to the pit of his stomach. Jack remembered back, searching for something unusual that might have happened before he got lost. Just before he ran off, he'd done something that shocked him a little. It didn't sound magical or anything, but it was the only thing that stood out. It wasn't just what he'd said to his parents, it was that he really seemed to mean it. "I hate you, and I never want to see you ever again." When he told Finn, the strange man got lost in thought again, then smiled and shook his head. "Ah, Jack, we've all said things like that at some point. That's definitely hurtful, and strong emotion can weaken the barrier, but it must have been awfully thin to start with. It is odd, but it's an easy fix. You'll just have to take back what you said, and you have to mean it." Despite the fact that Finn seemed to be very calm about all this, Jack started to worry. How was he going to say anything to his parents if he was in another world? If he couldn't get a message to them somehow, he could be stuck here forever. He shared his confusion with Finn, and the man rubbed his head. "No, right, I think I explained this badly," answered Finn. "You see, this world and your world are still in the same place. It's like one is inside the other, but invisible. If you find the spot where you last saw them, you should be able to break back through and return to your world. You just need to think hard about how you really feel about your parents. That should bring you back to them." Yet again, Finn should have sounded crazy, but Jack found himself believing what he was hearing. There was something oddly convincing about the man's voice, though Jack couldn't quite figure out what. Finn told Jack to wait while he headed into the house to get something. There was a lot of rustling and one or two crashes inside. Then Finn emerged holding an old-fashioned lantern. Jack didn't see how Finn lit the lantern, but he sang a little song as he did. The song sounded strangely familiar to Jack. The flame inside looked bright green. Jack wondered if the glass was tinted, but there was something odd about the light itself. As it glowed on the trees around them, it somehow made the forest more foresty. The leaves seemed to stretch towards the light. The soft green light comforted Jack more than he expected. He felt more brave than he had in hours. Finn looked knowingly at Jack, gazing into the flame. "You can borrow the lantern if you like, but it'll only be able to come so far into the matter world with you. Fey objects, myself included, wear the barrier thin. This is important. You must leave it here in Fey before you pass through." Jack thanked Finn for the lantern, forcing himself to smile, and then headed off into the woods. He held the strange green light in front of him, like a shield against the cold, the rain, and the dark. Jack scratched himself on brambles, was hit in the face by branches, but it didn't bother him. He just kept on going. As the wind bit Jack's fingers, he worried that the flame in the old lantern might go out. It didn't flicker. The gentle green light fought back the tendrils of darkness snaking between the trees. Far in the distance, Jack could hear strange noises, sounds that he knew didn't exist in his own world. The shrieks and howls should have terrified him, but he knew not to worry. It wasn't far now, not long, and he'd be back with his mum and dad, safe and sound. He found the clearing quicker than expected, and as soon as he was there, he started to yell out, "Mum! Dad! I'm sorry! I do love you! I want to see you again! I want to go home! Please, can you hear me? I want to go home! I miss you both so much!" He shouted till his throat hurt, closing his eyes tight, trying to wish his parents there. Finally, he heard footsteps behind him. He didn't want to get his hopes up. The noise was probably Finn moving around in the trees behind him, but something deep inside told him it had worked. Jack opened his eyes, whipping round to see his parents running for him, arms open wide. They hugged for what felt like hours, Jack constantly repeating apologies and telling them he loved them. Jack led the way, holding the lantern up high for his parents to follow. They walked all the way back, bathed in the strange green glow. It was only once he was at home, already in his pyjamas, that his parents thought to ask him about the lantern. "Oh, this! I met a man in the forest. He gave me this lantern and told me everything would be fine. I just found you both and told you I was sorry." His parents clearly weren't sure about this man in the forest, but they didn't get much of a chance to ask Jack. Jack was exhausted and was asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow, with the peculiar light of Finn's lantern flickering on his bedroom wall.